Hey, what's going on, guys, and welcome back to another video of Keep It Simple Stupid. And today we're going to be discussing the difference between colloids and crystalloids, and we're going to make it simple. Again, this is not going to be a super in-depth explanation of both, but the idea here is that after this video, you should have a basic understanding of what the key differences are between these two types of fluids. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. So first things first, let's just discuss the very basic definitions of these two types of fluids. So let's go ahead and start with crystalloid. So crystalloid, it's an IV fluid. It's composed of water, small molecules, electrolytes, sugars that can freely cross semi-permeable membranes. And the difference, thinking about a colloid, is it contains larger molecules, lists out protein starches that do not freely cross capillary membranes. When it comes to molecule size, just remember crystalloid is small, colloid is large, and we're going to go ahead and discuss a little deeper why this becomes important in a medical setting. Let's discuss the behavior of these two different types of fluids. So with the crystalloid, it distributes rapidly into the extracellular space, and the reason it can do that is because, again, the molecules are small. So 25% stays intravascular, and the remainder enters the interstitial space. Now, the interesting thing with a colloid, right, because it is a large molecule, and because it is a large molecule, it's not crossing those same membranes that crystalloid can cross. And because that colloid creates oncotic pressure, hypothetically, increasing the oncotic pressure inside of a vessel will cause fluid to move into the intravascular space via osmosis. So again, crystalloid, small, and because of that, it can kind of go everywhere. Colloid, big, stays intravascular and theoretically pulls fluid into that intravascular space. Very quickly, here's just a basic table that I threw together about the difference between the two. So again, let's think about composition and size. Crystalloids, small, colloids, big. Osmotic/oncotic effect. Crystalloids, not really doing anything, again, because the molecules are small and they're moving back and forth to interstitial to intravascular. Colloids, they're big molecules, right? So they tend to stay intravascular and they do exert that oncotic pressure. And then intravascular retention. Crystalloids, 25% stays intravascular, but again, because it's small, it's kind of moving back and forth quite a bit. And then colloids, big molecules, they stay intravascular. And for volume required, crystalloids are going to need a lot of volume to resuscitate, and then colloids, it should be a small volume. Cost, inexpensive crystalloids, expensive colloids. And here's some examples. So NS, that just stands for normal saline, a very common fluid to order in a medical setting, as well as lactated ringers. And then for colloids, we're thinking albumin, hetastarch, dextrin. And then clinical use, crystalloids, that's going to be your first line for fluid resuscitation. And then colloids, and I'll explain why, but it's a little bit more of a rare scenario that you may want to order a colloid. And then adverse effects, crystalloids, pretty low. There's a hyperchloremic acidosis you can get with NS. We're not going to get into that in this video. And then for colloids, there's a risk of coagulopathy, anaphylaxis, renal impairment. So a lot more adverse effects with colloids. And very quickly here, I will just discuss some very basic pathophysiology here. And what I've drawn out here, as you will see in blue, this represents the endothelium of a vessel. And then these little kind of marks right here, these represent the junctions between the endothelium. And for this example, this big gap right here, so this represents the capillary leak that occurs physiologically in the setting of, for example, sepsis, trauma, burns. So this opening that I drew in red right there, that is not normal. That is due to an insult, okay? And now the thing you need to know about colloids, right, they're big molecules, right? So an ideal setting, right, these big molecules shouldn't be able to leave the intravascular space, right, because they're too big. But the issue, and why they're not first line in the settings of things like sepsis, is because they're large. Well, now there are openings in the endothelium, capillary leak due to inflammation. So while theoretically they should have stayed intravascular, now that they're big, they're moving out of the intravascular space. And because of that, right, because of osmosis, fluid wants to follow these big particles. And if they're now moving out, what this will do is now you're worsening all the edema, and you're really not even repleting anything in that intravascular space now, because they're just following those big molecules outside of the intravascular space. From a pathophys standpoint, here's the crystalloid. They're little molecules kind of hanging out, doing their thing. And then with those capillaries, healthy or not healthy, they're always able to move through, not an issue. And we know that some of those, 25% around, they're going to stay in that intravascular space anyway. So even if there is sepsis, trauma, burns, there is an opening in the capillary membrane that occurs due to inflammation. The crystalloid doesn't really care because it's moving back and forth anyway, and it's not exerting an effect in oncotic pressure. So in these settings, yes, there will be some that will move out of the intravascular space, but that's normal. There's still going to be those that remain inside the intravascular space. It's no problem. That is a pretty basic example of why crystalloid a lot of the time is the preferred fluid to give in many, many, many settings that you will see in medicine. That's all I have for you guys today. I hope that was helpful. Again, I try to keep it very basic, very simple. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and if you'd like me to discuss a specific topic, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.